Good morning, everyone. It's great to be in ARCO, particularly considering the tradition that ARCO has with offshore wind. But I have to say I'm particularly excited to be at a conference. If we had this conference on offshore a couple of years ago, I think at the time the level of interest was quite minimal. And yet here I am standing on a Thursday morning with over 150 people in the room, really excited about the potential and the opportunity that wind creates. It's also great to kick off a conference when I hear David talking about a new target. So in case you didn't write it down, please do write it down. It's been said today. Our new target for offshore wind is 20 gigawatts, and we can deliver it. Okay, so it's a shame Mr. Nugent isn't here today. But I do think, I want to start with first of all, a little bit of a thank you and actually some encouragement, because I think it's fantastic that IWEA and now have actually come together today, as a really joined up collaboration to join what is, I believe, a huge potential, and I believe everyone here in the room believes is a huge potential. And eventually we can, really truly realise the opportunity that is in our waters and off our coast. And there's no bigger challenge than climate change to really get us excited and get us motivated and get us mobilised to deliver on this challenge. And it was interesting. I was just speaking to a couple of my former colleagues from electricity before we started. And yeah, it was 15 years ago, but you think about, you only have to walk out onto the platform outside the door to see the 7 turbines that was, back in 2003, the world's largest offshore wind farm. At the time, the turbines that were being used were prototypes. They were the biggest turbines in the world. Yes, we talk about new machines now of 10 and 12 megawatts, but back then 2.5 was, again, world leading. And we had this opportunity that in 2003, and I remember it, and I just joined electricity just at the end of 2003, and I remember the fanfare and the excitement around it. The Taoiseach at the time, Bertie Ahern, had arrived down, and whilst there was no formal commitment, there was lots of suggestions that offshore wind would be supported at the time. But unfortunately, you look back, that's 15 years ago. And, whilst that potential hasn't been delivered, it truly is a beacon of what I believe is the future right across the world. I think it's also important, and if I may just for a moment, just mark the occasion, because whilst he's not with us here today, obviously the late Brian Britton, a true visionary for our industry and particularly offshore, I imagine Brian is smiling down at us at the moment going, at last, IWEA now together, at last talking about the opportunity that is there to truly realise, an opportunity for Ireland and to be world leaders again. So I think it's appropriate. We obviously lost Brian earlier this year. I think it's appropriate just to mark that. I'm going to run through a bit of a speech now, in the sense that, because I think it's really, really inherent as a parent, and actually you start to think about the world further out than you actually do in the near term. And you start to think about, well, what is the world going to be like in 2030? What is the world going to be like in 2040, 2050 for your kids? And in particular, you realise actually time goes by incredibly quick. And I think Barack Obama, had an incredible line and a quote, and I apologise for repeating quotes, but I think it's really important, it's really meaningful, and that was, we are the first generation to feel the effect of climate change, and the last generation that we can do anything about it. And to be fair, anyone who still has their head stuck in the sand that does not believe climate change is having a profound impact around the world, whether it's the likes of hurricanes Katrina, whether it's the tsunamis we're seeing in Asia, whether it's like, the drought we're seeing right across Uganda and Africa, or whether it's just simply back in April when you look at the beast to the east that came and actually completely knocked us out for a week here in Ireland. Climate change is having a profound effect. And it's something, our generation, more than any others, stand ready to make that change. And I think it's incredibly proud as an Irish citizen to see the change that Ireland has taken on in the last number of years. And I think we definitely are the generation now that can really embrace the challenge, but also turn that challenge into the opportunity that is behind climate change. And I think, when you actually consider how we've done that through the power of people's voices, building movements for positive change that has really transformed Irish society. But I think, again, some issues are so profound. It takes more than individuals. Individuals will play a huge part of it. But actually it takes the collective. And it takes real direct government will and direction and support in partnership with industry to deliver that. Yet as I stand here today, I think everyone will agree, I don't know about you guys, but I'm sick of hearing about us being laggards. I'm tired of actually seeing Ireland being at the back of the table. I think we're 27 to 28 when it comes to our climate emissions. It is time to act. Now is the time to act. There's no doubt about that. And we need to look at actually the huge capability that we have, both here in our people, the opportunity that is there to really, go after this. And I really want us to be clear about this. Our efforts to date have failed. We've made huge inroads with regard to renewable energy. There's no doubt about that. But the reality is 2020 carbon emission targets, we're going to fail. Right? That's a fact. We're not going to get to the 16% target. And when you look out to 2030, the challenge becomes even more difficult. So the time now for action, as Barack Obama said, is now. We have to do something about this right now. And I think there's a huge amount of credit that goes to the work that has been done, whether it's through OE, whether it's through all the industry players who've actually delivered on the renewable targets to this date. From an electricity point of view, we're talking about 32%. I was talking to a colleague as well there before. You think about back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we're talking about moratorium on wind energy. Now we're up to over 32% of our total energy supplied is coming from wind energy, onshore wind. It's played a huge part. But when you look forward and you look at the challenge is just so big, we can't rely on any one technology. What we have done in the past will not deliver success going forward. It will be a part of the success, but it will not deliver success. And that's where now the timing is absolutely right for offshore wind to play a significant part, if not the central part, of the revolution that we actually need to deliver. And I think we don't need to look, and we can all step back and say, well, that sounds like a big ask. Are we capable? Can it be done? And I could take huge encouragement from actually spending a lot of time in the UK. We're obviously a UK company, spend a lot of time in the UK, and I just look across the border and see what's actually happening there. And before, back in 2003, it was Ireland. We were the leaders. We were pride of place. And in those 15 years, the UK now has over 7 gigawatts of offshore wind deployed, is on track to hit 30 gigawatts of onshore. That's 30 gigawatts of offshore wind. Offshore wind will deliver 30% of the power that's required in the UK by 2030. And you look towards how have they done that? And I know that a number of our speakers later today will talk about, well, in the first instance, they came out with a clear intent and clear target. So the government's been very strategic about how it actually leases its seabed, and then actually how it, setting the different targets, even coming out in the most recent auction with pricing, with a budget around what will be spent. And what that has done then has actually built the momentum behind the supply chain. And that is a real thriving industry where it's competitive. We've seen the prices. David has talked about the prices come off. You don't have to go back too long ago where the prices were up around £150 per megawatt hour. The last auction was between around about 60 to around about 70 in yesterday's money. In today's money, that's probably closer to £75 per megawatt hour. But we've seen an almost halving of price. And why is that? That is primarily because in the UK, they've set a target, they set a framework to actually go about delivering that target. And they are now world leaders in actually offshore development. And I suppose that's our challenge from an Irish perspective. As a country, on the most westerly country in Europe, with an incredible coastline, with an abundance of resource, how do we now take advantage? Because this is the biggest challenge of our life. It is as simple as that. Climate change is the biggest challenge of our generation. And it's the people in this room, it's the people in industry, it's right across all the stakeholders, government, right across the whole piece, who can actually deliver this. And I was really encouraged, this in the last couple of weeks when I've seen the report from IWEA come out about Catapult, with Catapult in conjunction with Catapult in Cornwall, and I've seen, I think an excellent report, with Mike Hayes' order in KPMG. What was really stood out to me is actually we're all saying the same things. We all know what is required. We're very clear about what is required. We need a clear signal from government. What is the intent? Where are we trying to get to? We need a RES scheme that actually accommodates offshore wind. It's incredibly welcoming to see that RES is now out there. It continues support for onshore wind, which is absolutely required, and it also opens the door for offshore wind. But at the same time, we need more than just opening a door. We need to set, specific size pots that are of the size, this scale. Once we look out the window here and see, 27 megawatts, the scale of offshore wind farms now are anything 500 megawatts plus. Our own Arco Bank wind farm, which we are progressing at the moment, will be a minimum of 520 megawatts when it is built in the early 2020s. That could easily push up to 800 megawatts or more. When you look at the whole east coast of Ireland, we have almost a pipeline of 4.5 gigawatts of offshore wind ready to be built. If we can actually progress the support as a key part, that will be delivered. The other key attributes, again, you've heard this. I'm looking around the room. We meet up at different conferences. We've heard it before. It's grid access. The most recent ECP, which again is positive in the sense that it opens up grid access, but unfortunately, it has ignored the need for a grid connection for offshore wind. And grid connections for offshore wind, we're talking about serious scale. They should have their own pot. From a benefits point of view, it's on the east coast of Ireland in the first instance, where the demand centre is, where there's a significant challenge to meet the demand on the east coast. And yet, right now as we stand here, there is still no route of access for grid. And then lastly, and we've talked about it before, is planning. A lot of the existing offshore wind farms have been around for quite some time. Our own Arco Banks was consented back in 2002, 2003. And yet, to be fair, the foresight at the time and the team with Pamela and Torben and the rest of the guys in electricity at the time, the envelope that was actually permitted is sufficient to fit these 8 and 10 megawatt machines today. So this industry is ready once there is a number of enablers put in place. And as an industry and as a group, it's incumbent upon us all to really call for this, because if we do not get these changes, we will continue along the trajectory that we have seen for the last number of years, which will bring a level of success, but will come nowhere near to meeting the challenge that we're facing. I'll finish by saying this again is our biggest challenge. We can't ignore the challenge. It is now time to act upon it. It is time to make the investment. The investors are ready to make the serious €1 billion investment in the Irish industry to drive this forward. It's so important from a coastal regeneration point of view. I only have to spend time again and looking at some of the offshore wind farms, the difference those wind farms are making in coastal areas all around the whole of the UK, which for numerous reasons had really seen everybody leave, and now they are being revitalised. I was only over in Beatrice with a number of delegates in the last number of weeks in the UK to see the impact it's having in Wick Harbour, to see the impact it's having in the local neighbourhood, the number of construction workers. We are talking thousands of workers driving in industry, regenerating our coastal areas right across the country. And then if you think from a potential point of view and our position from the most westerly, windiest part of Europe, it's one thing to talk about the East Coast, but with floating technology coming, when you open up the entire West Coast, you think about this massive, massive potential. And to be truly leaders, as which I know we all aspire to be, we have to tap into that. It can't be just 2030. We need to have the vision and the ambition to go up to 2050. We need to be talking about when we will get to 100% renewables, when we will take carbon completely out of our economy. Because the resources that is available in this country, and it's not pie in the sky, the resources that is available in this country is here, but it needs to be delivered upon now. So thank you very much for your time. No doubt you'll have a very informative day, and I hope you have a great time today. Thank you very much.